From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to create safe roads by design, engineering solutions, and education. More information at visionzerolouisville.org.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Food is more than just nourishment. It's tradition, a source of togetherness, and in many faiths, a way to connect with something greater than ourselves. This week, we're exploring how food plays a role in religious observances, shaping cultural identity and carrying deeper meaning beyond what's on the plate. Today, we're diving into the Jewish celebration of Passover, exploring its rich food customs and significance with Rabbi Ben Freed. Rabbi Ben Freed leads the Knesset Israel congregation in Louisville. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, where he also earned a master's in Jewish thought. Currently, he's teaching Doing Jewish at Home Passover Edition, a series on hosting Passover seders. You might also recognize his voice as the co-host and co-creator of the Bluegrass Schmooze podcast right here at LPM. Rabbi Freed, thanks for joining us today on Track.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I heard a rumor that Passover is your favorite tradition of the year.
Passover is. It's my favorite holiday, and a big part of that is because of the Passover Seder, which really is like a big feast. It is both all about and not about the food. That the food is almost a vehicle for the telling of a story, which is very cool.
Right, and just to kind of clarify, the Seder is sort of like the meal that kicks off Passover, the holiday itself.
Yes, Passover is a week-long holiday, and on the first night of Passover, traditionally, you have a Seder, and then in most communities, you also have a second one on the second night.
Okay.
So it's back-to-back Seders, which can be exhausting, but in a really amazing way.
Sounds like belly's full, really.
Oh, by the end of the second Seder, bellies are very, very full.
So I got to start with the preliminary question of what exactly is Passover?
Yeah, so Passover is a holiday celebrating the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt after they were enslaved by Pharaoh for 400 years. And for anyone who hasn't seen the Ten Commandments or Prince of Egypt, there's 10 plagues. There's lots of things that happen to get the Israelites out of Egypt. And so this is the holiday kind of celebrating that exodus. And the Seder is meant to be a reenactment of that we are meant to each and every generation feel as though we are personally ourselves going out of Egypt. And the Seder is designed in a way to help us experience that.
So, so just as you're saying, the Seder is it's not just a meal, it's an experience. So, and it's an interactive experience, right? Like, can you share some of those traditions that help make people feel that they're on this exodus?
Absolutely. So the director of the summer camp that I grew up going to, his name is David Weinstein. He used to say that the best Jewish experiential education thing is the Seder. It's not some program people wrote. It's not some new pedagogical tool. That the Seder is experiential education at its finest. It includes eating. It includes drinking 4 cups of wine. It's centered around questions, that we're supposed to be asking questions all along the way. And the food has a lot to do with the experience. So we dip a vegetable into salt water that's meant to recall the tears of our ancestors and, what they were experiencing in slavery. We eat bitter herbs to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. But then we also eat charoset, which is this kind of paste that, depending on where your family comes from, is made up of various nuts and dried fruits and different things that's meant to kind of represent the mortar that would go between the bricks. We eat matzah, our unleavened bread that our ancestors ate because they were in such a rush to get out of Egypt. They didn't have time to let their bread rise. So almost all of the food in the Seder, or at least the food that's used as part of the educational purpose of the Seder, has a point to it. We then also, part of the Seder is just a big meal. So, brisket doesn't necessarily symbolize anything, but it's delicious. So it doesn't hurt to throw that in as well.
So there's a lot of symbolism, it sounds like, in the food. And is this consistent amongst all Seders? They must include these foods? Or is it different depending on the host?
It's going to be a little different depending on the host and depending on where your family comes from. So seders where people come from Eastern Europe are going to look different than seders of Jewish families from North Africa or Iraq or Iran or Russia or France, that each will have some slightly different traditional foods. For example, the vegetable that's traditionally dipped in the salt water, in many places it's parsley to represent kind of spring and new growth and greenness. In Russia, potatoes, because they didn't have parsley growing by the time Seder was coming around. So they would dip a potato in the salt water. And just kind of different places are going to have slightly different takes on them. But the overall thing of how do we get you to feel these emotions? How do we get you to understand the messages we're trying to get across? Those are all the same.
Is there anything Kentucky specific?
Ooh, that's a great question. To my knowledge, well, so one of the things about Passover and one of the things about Jewish food in general is that a lot of our food traditions are built around what we can't eat, that we find ways to make meaning. And so on Passover, we can't eat any grains that are not matzah. So anything made out of wheat or barley or even corn in some traditions are no-nos. And so that influences the type of food we have at our seder. So for instance, something like bourbon that you would think like, oh, it's 4 cups of wine. Does anyone in Kentucky do 4 cups of bourbon at your seder? We can't do that because bourbon is a grain alcohol.
Right.
And so we can't have that on Passover. That has to be the wine. So to my knowledge, there aren't any Kentucky specific things, but to be fair, I've only been here for 3.5 years, so there could be that I'm just not familiar with.
Maybe that's like one of those modern twists. I'm assuming there's some people who do make a modern take on the Seder, or do they?
Yeah, so I think there are definitely ways that people update their seders and take them in different directions. At its core, there are kind of certain building blocks that you have to have.
Right.
It has to be telling the story of the Exodus. You have to have matzah. You have to have, bitter herbs, right? But like, right. One thing that people do these days is I saw recently someone was doing like a 10 plagues cocktails using non-grain alcohols, but like a bitter herbs martini or like different things like that. That absolutely is not something that they would have thought of 2,000 years ago, but can be a part of your Passover Seder today.
So you talk about those 4 cups of wine as well. What do they symbolize? And is there a specific type of wine that needs to be?
Yeah, so there's not a specific type of wine. Generally speaking, at most seders, it would be a kosher wine. But kosher wines can be anything from like super sweet Manischewitz to like a nice Cabernet that just happens to be kosher, to a white wine if you more prefer that. But those 4 cups, they almost kind of guide us through the Seder. We pour them at different parts. In Judaism, we bless most things over wine, that wine symbolizes joy in our tradition. And so when we sanctify the Sabbath, we do it over wine. When we end the Sabbath, we do it over wine. When we start a new holiday, we do it over wine. There's actually a really interesting part in the Seder, though, where we spill wine out of our glass. That during the recitation of the 10 plagues, it's traditional to actually take wine using either a knife or your finger and spill drops of wine out of your glass to represent that our joy is diminished by the suffering of others. That even though the 10 plagues were necessary to get the Jews out of Egypt, we recognize that there were a lot of Egyptians who suffered during those 10 plagues, and that doesn't make us happier. That actually takes wine out of our glass. That diminishes our joy. So just another example of the way that we use the food and its symbolism to help us tell the story, to help us feel what's going on.
Yeah, you really can hear the story and what you're telling you and all these different pieces that are part of the Seder. Now, I don't know if you said this, but the 4 cups of wine, what is it about 4 cups of wine that is important?
So there's a lot of 4s in the Passover Seder. So you have 4 cups of wine. There's traditionally 4 questions that the youngest child asks. There's a whole segment that we do where there's 4 different types of children, the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who does not know how to ask. So this kind of number 4 repeats itself a lot of times throughout the Seder. And there are a number of different theories about, what that connects to, that there's 4 seasons, there's 4 different names of the holiday, that there's not really a one unified theory of why it's 4, but as far back as we have records of the Seder, of the kind of instructions for how to do the Seder that go back about 2,000 years, and so we can assume that it was oral tradition even longer before that, and they all include these 4 cups, these 4 things in all these different ways.
It's so interesting. I like the mystery that it's something that's been passed on, and there's many theories on the 4.
Right. A lot of Jewish tradition is kind of one really long game of broken telephone, where things get passed from generation to generation, and we hope that everything gets passed down, but sometimes things get lost. And so we try to be as faithful as we can to the tradition as it was handed to us. And we try to then also, make our own twist to it and do things. But we know that in every generation, we might lose a little bit that doesn't get transferred. So some things we know what to do, but we don't necessarily know why we do it.
I can't help but ask, is there a traditional Jewish food that you secretly hate?
Is there in general or just on Passover specific?
I guess we'll go Passover in specific.
So, yes, I don't secretly hate this. I publicly hate this. Gefilte fish.
Okay.
So gefilte fish, for those who are not familiar, I call it cold fish hot dog. It is like this gelatinous lump of ground fish that is traditionally eaten on Passover and at other times, often eaten with horseradish. Some people really love it. I think it's absolutely disgusting. Depending on where in Europe, it's a European Jewish tradition. It doesn't really exist in other Jewish cultures, but depending on whether your family was from northeastern Europe or southeastern Europe, your gefilte fish might be a little sweet or a little savory or a little salty. But whether yours is sweet or salty, I don't like it. Please don't serve it to me.
Is there any symbolism to the gefilte fish as well?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it was just a kind of semi-traditional dish in the region that Jews kind of adopted as, or maybe even pioneered in some way as this thing. Although the only thing I like about gefilte fish is that there's a Jewish children's book called The Carp in the Bathtub, where it's this child and their grandmother brings home a carp and puts it in the bathtub. And in like normal children's books, you would think, oh, that's cute. Like maybe the carp and the kid will become friends. No, the grandma kills the carp and grounds it up and makes it into gefilte fish. And I just think that's brilliant children's book writing. And so I still love the carp in the bathtub, even though I do not like eating gefilte fish.
So it's a realist.
Oh, it's very realist. It's like, here's how the world works. Here's where your gefilte fish comes from. It's the carp in the bathtub.
Well, okay, so that's like food preparation in a way. I mean, what do you do to get your house prepared for Passover?
Oh, so that's a big question. Because when I mentioned that we don't eat any grains, that's a very strict prohibition, to the point that we're not even supposed to own any bread products or grains or anything like that. So if you have any pasta in your house, got to get rid of it. You have any bread in your house, basically anything that is not kosher for Passover is supposed to be removed from your home. And all of your dishes that you use all year either have to be put away and you take out new dishes that you have specially for Passover, or they have to go through a process of koshering, of re-becoming kosher, so that you can use them for Passover. So Passover spring cleaning is a really big deal in Jewish households, because it really is this time when you clean out all the things you have and either throw them away or put them kind of in one locked room that's away, that will not be touched that whole week. And then all of your pots and pans and your oven and everything is being like totally cleaned and re-koshered, becoming kind of newly kosher again, so that you can do your preparations for Passover. So before you can even start cooking, you have to do this whole intensive cleaning and koshering and process to make everything kosher, so that then everything that you cook is kosher for Passover, is able to be eaten on Passover.
And is that does that process start way before, or when does that begin?
Depends on how good you are at planning ahead. I know I have people who've reached out who've already started buying some kosher Passover products to make sure that they stock up. Because again, one of the things about being in a city like Louisville is that we have decent access to kosher Passover products, but not like a city like Chicago or New York or anything like that. So some people, they see that matzah come out, they see things come out, they make sure to buy it so that they have it in their homes. Most people, I would say, start cleaning somewhere in the 1 to 2 weeks in advance. Some people start a couple days before if they haven't gotten their act together. But I'd say 1 to 2 weeks is a reasonable time to start the cleaning out. And then the night before Passover, there's actually kind of a ritualized final cleaning that you do, where especially if you have kids, you like hide little pieces of bread around the house, and the kids are supposed to hunt for them with a candle or a flashlight, and then you take them and like that's how you finish the cleaning out of the bread in your home.
That's a lot of fun. Then it's very like inclusive and interactive for the kids.
Right. And again, the whole point of a lot of these holidays is how do we build them in so they are inclusive and interactive, that kids are also supposed to enjoy the seder. They might not get 4 cups of wine, although for many Jewish children, their first experience of having significant amounts of wine is at Passover Seder tables. I'll let other people tell stories about that. But the whole Seder is meant to be about questions, is meant to be interactive. A lot of people have like little toys and things on their Seder table that might represent the plagues or wandering in the desert or different things, so that kids feel engaged, even though your Seder might be kind of long.
And the questions, it's 4 questions as well? Or is there...
So there's 4 specific questions that are kind of like memorized by the youngest child and recited, often standing on top of their chair and like, being put in the spotlight. But we encourage questions throughout the Seder, that the 4 questions are just like, these are the emblematic questions, but in my wife's family, they had a tradition at the Seder that she went to where they would have little bells on the table. And if you had an observation or a question or something, you would like pick up one of the little bells and ring it, and it would stop the Seder and you would ask your question or make your observation or whatever it was. And so we've taken that, and that's now a part of our family's Seder as well. And when I lead our synagogue Seder for our whole synagogue, I have candy that I throw at people, not when they give a good answer to a question, but when they ask a question. That the asking of questions is supposed to be prioritized, and because that is how you search for meaning.
So what tradition concludes the Seder?
So what concludes the Seder there's a bunch of singing that concludes the Seder, but right before that, what concludes the meal, the food portion of the Seder, is what's known as the afikomen, which is a little piece of matzah that has been hidden by the Seder leader, and all the kids had to go, again, interactive kids, the kids go, they find the afikomen, and then they hold it hostage, and the Seder leader has to negotiate with them for the redemption of the afikomen so that then everyone can eat the afikomen, because you're supposed to eat it before as a way to finish the Seder. So in some families, the kids get money or gift cards. In some families, they get candy or food. We started a tradition at our synagogue that I learned from my parents and other places of I give money from my discretionary fund to a charity of the children's choosing, that they get together and they decide on where they want the money to be donated to, and then I donate it on their behalf. And that's kind of how we do our negotiations.
That's a good time to learn negotiations.
Exactly. And, some kids are more intense about the negotiations than others. Some kids, they hear like, oh, you get a piece of candy and we'll donate something. They're like, great. And some kids are like, I think I want a little bit more. We hold the power here.
Lots of life skills.
Exactly.
Well, we'll be back in a minute with more after the break. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Springtime is just around the corner, and it's not too soon to start planting your garden. Maybe you're wondering if your spot is sunny enough to support sweet peas, how to make your rosebuds abundant, or when to prune your poplar. Ask our master gardeners. Call or text 502-814-TALK. That's 502-814-8255 with your questions for On Track's Spring Gardening Show. Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and this week we're exploring the role of food in religious observances, and our focus today is on Passover. We're talking with Rabbi Ben Freed of Knesset Israel Congregation here in Louisville. So as your podcast listeners know, this will be your first Passover Seder as a dad. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
So we're talking about kids getting involved. Yeah. So how do you plan to involve your little one in the celebration?
So it's a good question. My little one is currently only 3 months old, so she'll be about 4 months old at the Seder. So this particular Seder might not be quite so interactive. Technically, she should recite the 4 questions, but because she will be the youngest participant at our Seder. But we had a similarly aged child at a Seder before where we just kind of like moved her mouth open while we all sang them. So maybe we'll do that with Meirav this year. But no, I think that as she gets older, there are different ways that we bring our kids both into the Seder and into Passover in general. I think that one of the great things about, living in our day and age is that we have so many cultural touch points that are more accessible to kids. So everything from the Rugrats Passover episode to Prince of Egypt to, in my family, we watched the whole 3.5 hour long 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston every year. But there are all these different ways of engaging kids. And as we've mentioned in the Seder, there's things you can play with. There's questions you can encourage. When I was growing up, my parents, when there were a lot of kids at the Seder, all the kids would go and kind of create a little play that was acting out the Exodus. So one kid would be Moses and one kid would be Pharaoh and one kid would be Aaron, and they would be slaves and then say let my people go, and then they would act out the play while the adults were eating dinner. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can connect kids into the Seder.
You brought me way back with that Rugrats reference.
Oh yeah, big
I
Rugrats.
Can see it.
Rugrats Passover, Rugrats Hanukkah. Rugrats did amazing things for the American Jewish community.
I love that. Well, okay, I know she's very little, but are you planning on passing on some special family recipes to her? Are you excited to pass on that you're willing to share maybe with us as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So one recipe that is very meaningful to me is my great-great-grandmother made these matzah popovers, which are, you'd think, if we're not supposed to have leavened things, we're not supposed to, how do you get something to pop over, right? Popover is this kind of like muffiny dish. And the secret is a lot of eggs and a lot of butter. And I'll share the whole recipe with you later. But the idea, the way it was passed down is really cool, is that she was from the old country. She didn't use cups and, things. She used a handful and a pinch and a this and a that. And so my grandmother actually once cooked with her. And she made her stop right before she would do everything and would measure out whatever it was that she was about to put in so that we could have the recipe recorded and be able to be handed down and passed on and shared and connected with our family. So it's one that, it started out with a handful of this and a pinch of that. We now have it in cups and tablespoons and teaspoons so that those of us who don't trust ourselves so much with baking sizes in that way can do it more effectively. But it pairs amazingly with chicken soup and matzo balls. Also just really great with a little bit of butter. Pop it in the microwave for, 15 seconds. It's nice and moist. It's one of my favorite Passover treats and traditions.
Oh, that sounds really amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your secrets.
Of course. I'm an open book.
So am I right that sometimes people not of the Jewish faith are invited to the seder?
Yeah, absolutely. Seder is what I would call a kind of closed tradition in Judaism, in the sense that we don't encourage non-Jews to have their own seders. That the seders, as we say, are a recognition and a celebration of the Jewish exodus from Egypt. So if non-Jews are interested in learning more about that, I encourage them to get in touch with their local, with a synagogue or with Jewish friends, or try to, snag a Seder invite in those ways. At our Seder, we often have non-Jewish friends, both growing up at my family's Seders and, today at our Seders, we often invite non-Jewish members of our communities because we want to share these stories of going from slavery to redemption, that can be a very universal story. It's not just a Jewish story, but this specific way of celebrating it is a Jewish tradition.
So if someone does snag one of those invitations, are there any key do's and don'ts they should keep in mind as a guest?
Great question. Generally speaking, don't offer to bring food. That Seders, again, because we have all of these rules around what food we can and can't eat, you could bring flowers, you could bring a bottle of kosher for Passover wine. There's things that are easy, but don't try to bring food, because then it just becomes an uncomfortable conversation if you show up with something that doesn't quite fit into the Passover rules. Do come with curiosity and questions. Again, we said that questions are the basis of the Seder, so when you see something or hear something or taste something that touches your life, share that, connect with that, be an active participant in the Seder. That I think sometimes when non-Jews come to a Seder, they think that their job is to just kind of sit back and watch and listen, but everyone who's around the Seder table is meant to participate in that Seder together. So come with an open mind and an open mouth that's ready to eat and ready to share.
I love that. That's so beautiful. That's what a meal is about, really. So I got to ask, so for the Seder, non-Jewish folks are welcome to this, but is there any other traditions like that?
That are open or that are closed?
That are open.
Yeah, I mean, Jews are fairly open if you are a non-Jewish person who's just curious about Judaism, you can go to a synagogue service. You can go to a celebration of I think all of our holidays. I don't think there's anywhere we would bar non-Jews from attendance. I think, good rules of thumb are always, if it's at a synagogue, just call ahead, let them know that you're coming. Whether that's because we need to make the right amount of food or just because it's helpful to us, in this day and age, unfortunately, we sometimes have to be skeptical of people we don't know just showing up at a synagogue. So knowing that you're coming in advance is really helpful. But yeah, I'd say pretty much all of our traditions are open for others to experience and to appreciate.
So through your community engagement work, whether it's Jews and Brews, the Doing Jewish at Home series, or your podcast, you create opportunities for people to connect with Jewish traditions in an engaging and accessible way. How do you see food playing a role in building those cultural connections? And why is it important that you share this knowledge, not just within the Jewish community, but with non-Jewish folks as well?
Yeah, so I think the food component of the tradition is very important. And so the Doing Jewish at Home series that I kind of launched this year is around 4 holidays around Hanukkah, around Passover, around Sukkot, the building of a sukkah, and then also around Shabbat, our weekly Sabbath. And each one of those, there's a series of classes, and one of those classes is a cooking class, because all of these things involve getting together to eat. And I think that's a really important part of who we are as Jews. We had a whole episode on this on the Bluegrass Schmooze on Jewish food. And one of our guests, Avery Robinson, who is a friend of mine, he talked about how a lot of what we think of as Jewish food came out of Jews adapting the cuisine of wherever they happened to be to the rules of Jewish cooking, to what was kosher, to what was like that. These days we see Jews adapting food that we traditionally think of as Jewish to the cuisine of wherever they happen to be. So there's all sorts of different cool evolutions happening in Jewish foodways. There's a great Jewish cookbook called Matzo Ball Gumbo that someone made that we're seeing this kind of taking these what we think of as traditional Jewish foods and then melding them into the cuisines of wherever we are. And I think that doing outreach and connection through food or just through education, through learning together is important, because we're all in this together. And I think it's important for us to be able to know about each other, about each other's traditions, in the same way that, I'm teaching folks about Passover. It was really important for me to attend the interfaith iftar dinner that the Muslim Americans for Compassion put on, because right now we're in the month of Ramadan. And so I know that you're talking also to people who are talking about iftars and about, I think, fish fries also this week, right? So that each of these ways of gathering are meant to bring people together, are meant to connect us. And one of the things that connects us best is food. And so I think that any way that we can come together, any way that we can come together over food, that we can come together organically, that we can come together in a way that shares deeper parts of who we are, that helps make the world a better place.
Oh, that's beautiful. I really love that. Well, I want to leave with, you talk about the Seder and questions. Mm-hmm. Do you have any singular question that stands out in your mind before we let you go that you think maybe we should digest ourselves?
I think one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about this year is kind of a question around, we're supposed to every year kind of experience this Exodus as though we are the ones leaving Egypt. But we also have earlier in the Seder, there's this thing that we read that says, this year we are slaves, next year may we be free. And so I think that tension between feeling free and feeling amazing here in Louisville and America, and who are the people who are not free? How are we not totally free ourselves? And what do we need to do as a community to get there?
Rabbi Freed, thanks for being here on Track, and I'm going to look out for that Seder invitation.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Rabbi Ben Freed leads the Knesset Israel congregation in Louisville. He's the co-host and co-creator of the Bluegrass Schmooze podcast, which you can find at bluegrasschmooze.org. And he is currently teaching Doing Jewish at Home Passover edition. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at louisvilleontrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Until next time, you're on Track with Louisville Public Media.